Good afternoon, dear friends. I'm glad to see you. And this is the next fairy tale, the tale of the merchant and the genie. There was once a very wealthy merchant who had a great deal of business in various cities. Now, one day he mounted his horse and went forth to collect debts that were owed to him in certain towns. The heat was so terrible along the way that he dismounted and sat down beneath a tree. He put his hand into his saddlebags, took out some bread and dried dates, and began to break his fast. When he had finished eating the dates, he threw away the pits with all his might, and suddenly a huge genie appeared, brandishing a drawn sword. As he approached the merchant, he said, "Stand up so I can slay you just as you've slain my son." "How have I slain your son?" asked the merchant. "When you ate the dates and threw away the pits, they struck my son in the breast as he was walking by, and he died right on the spot." "By Allah, if I slew your son," the merchant responded, "I slew him by chance, therefore I beg your pardon." "There's nothing you can do," asserted the genie. "You must die." Then he seized the merchant, threw him down on the ground, and raised his sword to strike him. But the merchant wept and cried out, "May Allah take pity on me and hear my plea." "Cut your words short," the genie answered. "You must die." But the merchant pleaded with him, "Listen to me. There's a great deal of money that's owed to me. I'm very wealthy and have a wife and children and many pledges in hand. So permit me to go home and take care of all my claims, and I shall come back to you at the beginning of the new year. Allah be my witness that I'll return to you, and then you can do what you want with me." The genie accepted his promise and let him go. So the merchant returned to his city and completed all his transactions. He gave all people their due, and after informing his wife and children what had happened to him, he appointed a guardian and lived with his family for a full year. At the end of that time, he performed the wuzu ablution to purify himself before death, took his shroud under his arm, said farewell to family, friends, and neighbors, and went forth against his own will. As he left, they began weeping, wailing, and beating their breasts, but he traveled until he arrived at the same garden where he had encountered the Jinnee. The day of his arrival was the beginning of the new year, and as he sat weeping over what had happened to him, a very old and honorable sheikh approached, leading a gazelle on a chain. After saluting the merchant and wishing him a long life, he asked, "Why are you sitting all alone in this place? Don't you know that it's the abode of evil spirits?" The merchant related to him what had happened with the Jinnee, and the old man was astounded and said, "By Allah, I've never seen such fidelity, nor have I ever heard such a strange story. If it were engraved for all to see, it would serve as a warning for all those who need to be warned." Then, seating himself near the merchant, he said, "My brother, I won't leave you until I see what is going to happen between you and this Ifrit." And after he sat down and the two were talking, the merchant became extremely anxious, terrified, and depressed. Just then a second sheikh approached them, and with him were two dogs, both black greyhounds. After the second man greeted them with the salam, he asked them, "Why are you sitting in this place? Don't you know that it is the abode of the demon genies?" So they told him the tale from beginning to end. And they had not been conversing very long before a third sheikh arrived, and with him was a she-mule with a bright bay coat. He saluted them and asked them why they were seated in that place, and they told him the entire story, and he too sat down with them. Just then a dust cloud advanced, and a mighty sand devil appeared amidst the waste. Soon the cloud opened, revealing the Jinnee with a drawn sword and eyes shooting fire sparks of rage, and he stepped forward, grabbed hold of the merchant, and separated him from the rest of the men. "Stand up so I can slay you just as you slew my son, the soul of my life," the Jinnee bellowed. The merchant wailed and wept, and the three old men began sighing and crying with their companion. Soon the first man, the owner of the gazelle, approached the Ifrit and kissed his hand. "Oh, Jinnee, crown of the kings of the jinn, if I were to tell you a story about me and this gazelle, and if you were to consider it wondrous, would you give me a third of this merchant's blood? If you tell me your tale, O sheikh, and it is indeed marvelous," the Jinnee replied, I'll give you a third of his blood." Thereupon the old man began to tell the first Sheikh's story. "I'll have you know, O Jinnee, that this gazelle is the daughter of my paternal uncle, my own flesh and blood, and I married her when she was a young maid. I lived with her for close to 30 years, but I was not blessed with any offspring. So I took me a concubine who gave birth to a boy, fair as the full moon, with glistening eyes, straight eyebrows, and perfect limbs. Little by little he grew to be a tall young man, and when he was 15, it became necessary for me to journey to certain cities with a large amount of goods. But my wife had learned the art of witchcraft, and she turned my son into a calf, and his mother into a cow, and placed them under the care of the herdsman. So, after a long time had passed, excuse me, it's a neighbor. But my wife had learned the art of witchcraft, and she turned my son into a calf and his mother into a cow, and placed them under the care of the headsman. So, after a long time had passed and I returned from my journey, I asked for my son and his mother, and she answered me by saying, "Your slave girl is dead, and your son has fled, and I don't know where he's gone." So my heart grieved for an entire year, and my eyes did not stop weeping until the time came for the great festival of Allah. Then I sent for my headsman and asked him to choose a fat cow for me. He brought me the one which had been my handmaid, whom his gazelle had bewitched. This gazelle had bewitched. I tucked up my sleeves, put on an apron, and taking a knife, I began to cut her throat. But she bellowed so loudly and wept such bitter tears that I was astonished. Out of pity, I dropped the knife and said to the headsman, "Bring me a different cow." Then my wife cried out, "Slay her! There's none fatter or fairer." Once more I made a move to sacrifice her, but again the cow bellowed loudly, and I could not bring myself to kill her. Instead, I commanded the herdsman to slay her and flay her. So he performed the sacrifice and skinned her, but could not find fat or flesh, only hide and bone. I repented when it was much too late, and I gave her to the headsman and said to him, "Fetch me a fat calf." So he brought me my bewitched son. When the calf saw me, he broke his tether, ran to me, fawned upon me, and shed tears. Consequently, I took pity on him and said to the headsman, "Bring me a cow and let this calf go." But my wife cried out, "You must kill this calf. It is a holy and blessed day, and nothing is to be slain except what is pure and perfect. And there is nothing among our calves that is fatter or fairer than this one. Look at the cow that I have just had slaughtered at your request, and how disappointed we are by the results," I said. "There was no benefit from her at all, and I'm extremely sorry for having killed her. So this time I'm not going to listen to you, and the calf will not be sacrificed. By Allah, you have no choice. You must kill him on this holy day, and if you don't kill him, you are no man for me, and I shall not be your wife." Now, when I heard those hard words, I went up to the calf with knife in hand, unaware of my wife's real purpose. However, when I looked at the calf, I commanded the headsman to take it away, and he did as I ordered him to do. On the next day, as I was sitting in my own house, the headsman came up to me and said, "Master, I want to tell you something that will make your soul rejoice and enable me to be the bearer of good tidings." "I'm listening," I said. I have a daughter," he began, "and she learned magic in her childhood from an old woman who lived with us. Yesterday, when you gave me the calf, I went into the house with it, and she looked at it and veiled her face. Then she kept laughing and weeping, at last said to me, 'Oh, father, has my honor become so cheap that you are now bringing strange men into the house for me?' I asked her, 'Where are these strange men, and why are you laughing and crying?' She answered, 'To tell you the truth, the calf that you have with you is the son of our master, the merchant, but his wife bewitched him and his mother. That's why I laughed, and I wept because of his mother, whom the merchant slew, unaware that it was she.' Of course, I was most astonished by this revelation, and I could hardly wait until the break of the day to come and tell all this to you. When I heard my herdman's words, I went with him to his house and was drunk with joy without having the least bit of wine. His daughter welcomed me and kissed my hand, and the calf came right away and fawned all over me as before. 'Is it true,' I asked the headman's daughter, 'all that you've said about this calf?' 'Yes, oh master,' she said, 'he's your son, your very own flesh and blood.' I rejoiced and said to her, 'If you can release him from this spell, you can have whatever property and cattle I have.' Master, she smiled, I don't desire such goods, and I shall take them only under two conditions. The first, that you marry me to your son, and the second, that you allow me to bewitch your wife and imprison her. Otherwise, I won't be safe from her malice. Now when I heard these words, I replied, Not only do I grant you your wish, but you may have all the cattle and the household stuff in your father's charge. And as for my wife, anything you do to her is all right with me. After I had spoken, she took a cup and filled it with water. Then she recited a spell over it and sprinkled it on the cup, saying, If Almighty Allah created you as a cup, then remain as you are and don't change. But if you are enchanted, return to your rightful form. All of a sudden, the calf trembled and became a man, and I embraced him and said, By Allah, tell me all that the daughter of my uncle did to you and your mother. And when he told me how everything had happened, I said, My son, Allah blessed you by enabling someone to restore you to your real form, and you may now receive your rightful due. Then I married him to the headman's daughter, and she transformed my wife into this gazelle by giving her a shape that is by no means loathsome. After this, the headman's daughter lived with us day and night until she died. Then my son journeyed forth to the cities of Hind and also to the city of this man who has offended you. And I also took this gazelle and wandered with her from town to town, seeking news of my son, until destiny drove me to this place where I saw the merchant sitting and weeping. Such is my tale. This story is indeed strange, said the Jinnee, and thus I shall grant you a third of the merchant's blood. Thereupon the second old man, who owned 2 greyhounds, came up and said, O Jinnee, if I relate to you what my brothers, these 2 hounds, did to me, and if you admit that it is more wondrous and marvelous than the tale that you've just heard, will you grant me a third of the merchant's blood as well? I give you my word, said the Jinnee, but only if your adventures are truly more marvelous. Thereupon the old man began. The second Sheikh's story. Let me begin by telling you, O Lord of the kings of the Jinn, that these 2 dogs are my brothers, and I am the third. When our father died and left us a capital of 3,000 gold pieces, I opened a shop with my share, and my brothers did the same. However, I had been in business just for a short time when my elder brother sold his stock for 1,000 dinars, and after buying equipment and merchandise, he journeyed to foreign lands. He had been gone with his caravan for 1 whole year when, one day, as I was sitting in my shop, a beggar stood before me asking for alms, and I said to him, Go, try somewhere else. In response, the beggar began weeping. "Have I changed so much that you don't recognize me anymore?" Then I looked at him more closely, and I realized it was my brother. So I stood up and welcomed him, and after seating him in my shop, I asked him what had happened. "Don't ask me," he replied. "My wealth is all gone, and so is my health." So I took him to the public bath, dressed him in a suit of my own, and gave him a room in my house. Moreover, after looking over the accounts of my stock in trade and my business profits, I found that my hard work had enabled me to earn 1,000 dinars, while my principal amounted to 2,000. So I shared the whole thing with him and said, "Just assume that you didn't make a journey abroad but remained at home. There's no reason now for you to be dejected about your bad luck." He took the share gleefully and opened up his own shop. Things went well for some days, but soon my second brother, that dog over there, also set his heart on traveling. He sold whatever goods and stock and trade that he had, and although we tried to prevent him from leaving, he would not listen to us. He equipped himself for the journey and joined a group of travelers. After an absence of 1 year, he came back to me just as my elder brother had, and I said to him, "Didn't I try to dissuade you from traveling? Destiny decreed in this way." He wept and cried out, "Now I am a mere beggar without a penny to my name or a shirt on my back." So I led him to the bath and dressed him in my own new clothes. Then I went with him to my shop, where I gave him something to eat and drink. Furthermore, I told him, "Brother, I generally draw up the accounts of my shop at the beginning of every year, and I intend to share the surplus with you." Thus, some time later, when I found a profit of 2,000 dinars, I praised the Lord and gave my brother 1/2 and kept the other for myself. Thereupon he set up his own shop, and we lived peacefully for many days. After a while, however, my brother began to urge me to travel with them, but I refused and argued, "What did you two gain from all your voyages that would make me want to travel?" Since I would not listen to them, we each returned to our own shops, where we bought and sold as usual. They kept urging me to travel for a whole year, but I continued to refuse. Finally, after 6 years had passed, I consented and said, "All right, my brothers, I shall be your companion and am ready to travel. Now, let me see what money you intend to bring with you." I found, however, that they did not have anything, for they had squandered their funds on rich food, drink, and carnal pleasure. Still, I did not reproach them. Far from it. Instead, I looked over my shop accounts once more, sold what goods and stock in trade were mine, and came out with a profit of 6,000 ducats, which I divided into half. After doing this, I went to my brothers and said, "These 3,000 gold pieces are for me, and you to conduct our trade during our travels. Let's bury the other 3,000 in the ground in case anything should happen to us. And if something does, each shall take 1,000 to open new shop." Since they both agreed, I gave each one 1,000 gold pieces and kept the same sum for myself. Then we prepared some goods for traveling and hired a ship to carry our merchandise and proceeded on our voyage. After a month at sea, we reached a city where we sold our goods, and for every piece of gold that we had invested, we gained 10. And when we were about to resume our voyage, we found a maiden on the seashore clad in worn and ragged clothes. She kissed my hand and said, "Oh, master, are you a man of charity and kindness? If so, I am prepared to repay you for your aid. You may find me benevolent and a man of good works," I said, "but I don't want any return for my deeds." Then she said, "Please, have me as your wife, O master, and take me to your city, for I am giving myself to you. Be kind, for I am one of those on whom charity and good works will not be lost. I can make you a fitting return for them, and you will not be ashamed by my condition." When I heard her words, my heart went out to her as though Allah had willed it. Therefore I took her, clothed her, gave her a comfortable place in the vessel, and treated her with honor. So we continued our voyage, and I became more and more attached to her, so that I could not bear to be separated from her day or night. Indeed, I paid more attention to her than to my brothers, with the result that they grew apart from me and became jealous of my wealth and the large amount of merchandise that I had acquired. So they planned to murder me and seize my wealth, and Satan made this seem right in their eyes. They waited one night and found me sleeping by my wife's side, whereupon they carried us up to the deck of the ship and threw us overboard. My wife awoke, startled from her sleep, and immediately she changed into a Jinnee, whereupon she lifted me up, carried me to an island, and disappeared for a short time. When she returned in the morning, she said, "Here I am, your faithful slave, who has duly repaid you for your kindness, for I have saved you from death in the deep waters. I am a Jinnee, and when I first saw you, my heart went out to you by the will of the Lord, for I am a believer in Allah. So I went to you in the condition you saw me, and you married me. But I am angry at your brothers, and I must certainly slay them." When I heard her story, I was surprised and thanked her for all she had done. But I said, "When it comes to slaying my brothers, You must not do this." Then I told her the tale of our lives from the beginning to the end, and on hearing it she said, "Tonight I shall fly like a bird over their ship and sink it, causing them to die." "By Allah," I responded, "don't do this. Remember the proverb, whoever helps an evildoer should let the evildoer do his own evil deeds." "Nothing can help them," the Jinnee replied. "By Allah, I must slay them." I humbled myself before her and begged that she pardon them, whereupon she picked me up and flew away with me until she set me down on the terrace of my own house. Then I took what I had hidden in the ground, bought new merchandise, greeted various people, and reopened the doors of my shop. When night came, I went home, and there I saw these two hounds tied up. Upon seeing me, they arose, whined, and fawned upon me, and before I knew what was happening, my wife said, "These two dogs are your brothers." "Who has done this to them?" I asked. I sent a message to my sister, and it was she who transformed them into dogs, and they will not be released from their present shape until 10 years have passed. You find me now, O Jinnee, on my way to my wife's sister, because the time has come to release my brothers from their condition. I stopped at this place when I saw this young man who told me all that had occurred to him, and I decided not to leave here until I saw what would happen between you and him. Such is my tale." "This is certainly a remarkable story," said the Jinnee. "Therefore I'll give you a third of this man's blood." Now the third sheikh, the master of the Shimyu, approached the Jinnee and said, "If I can tell you a tale more wondrous than these two, will you grant me the remainder of the merchant's blood?" "You have my word," the Jinnee answered. Then the old man began. The third sheikh's story. "I'll have you know, O Jinnee, that this mule was my wife. Now, it so happened that I had to leave home for 1 year, and when I returned from my journey, it was night, and I found my wife lying with a black slave on my couch. They were talking, laughing, kissing, and playing the close buttock game. When she saw me, she stood up and rushed over to me with a jug of water. As she ran toward me, she muttered spells over the water and sprinkled me with it. "Change your shape," she exclaimed, "and become a dog." All of a sudden I was a dog, and she drove me out of the house. I ran through the doorway and did not stop running until I came to a butcher's stall, where I rested and began to eat what bones were there. When the butcher saw me, he grabbed me and carried me into his house. But as soon as his daughter caught sight of me, she veiled her face and cried out, "What are you doing? Why are you bringing men to me?" "Where's the man?" her father asked. "This dog is a man, and his wife has enchanted him," she replied. If you want, I can release him from the spell." When her father heard her words, he said, "May Allah be with you, my daughter, release him." So she took a jug of water, and after uttering words over it, she sprinkled a few drops on me and said, "Leave that shape and return to your former one." And I returned to my natural shape. Then I kissed her hand and said, "I wish you'd transform my wife the same way you just changed me." Thereupon she gave me some water and said, "As soon as you see her asleep, sprinkle this liquid on her and say the words you heard me utter. Then she'll become whatever you desire." I returned to my house and found my wife fast asleep, and as I sprinkled the water on her, I said, "Leave that shape and change into a mule." Within seconds, she became a mule, and you are looking at her now, oh Jinnee, with your own eyes. Then the Jinnee turned toward her and asked, "Is this true?" And she nodded her head and replied by signs, "Indeed, it's the truth, for such is my tale." The Jinnee was very pleased by the old man's extraordinary story, and he gave him a third of the merchant's blood. Shaking with delight, he told the three sheikhs, "Thanks to you and your storytelling, the merchant is yours. You've saved him, and I now release him from his punishment." Thereupon the Jinnee disappeared, while the merchants embraced the old man and thanked them. Then the sheikhs wished him happiness and continued their journeys, each one heading towards the city of his destination. And Shahrazad noticed that dawn was approaching and stopped telling her tale. Thereupon Danazade said, "O sister, your tale was most wonderful, pleasant, and delightful. It is nothing compared to what I could tell you tomorrow night if the king would spare my life and let me live." By Allah, the king thought to himself, "I won't slay her until I hear some more of her wondrous tales." So they continued to rest in mutual embrace until daylight finally arrived. After this, the king got up to perform his official duties, but he did not call upon the vizier to perform the execution. Instead, he went to his assembly hall and began holding court. He judged, appointed, and deposed, forbidding this and permitting that. The rest of the day, after the divan was adjourned, King Shahryar returned to the palace. That night, he had his will of Shahrazad, as was his wont, and afterward, as they were relaxing, Danazade came to her sister and asked her to tell another tale. "With the king's permission," she said. And Shahryar replied, "You have my permission." So Shahrazad resumed her storytelling about the fisherman and the Jinnee, but that will be the next one.